All right, I want to welcome everyone. And if you were listening to last week's episode, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say this. I made a discovery, and it's kind of bad news. I don't really know what to do. But instead of saying, "Hi, this is Joey, the pastor," I have to say, "Hey, this is Joey, and I'm a Nephilim." Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God.
So what are you implying about mom?
Or dad, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Nice.
Come on, Jared. Go with it, dude.
And I am not a Nephilim. I have a soul, and I will be spending eternity with God.
Ouch. And this is the Nephilim with no answers. Hey, I actually thought, here's what I think is unfair about, obviously I trust in God and everything, but it seems unfair for someone to be born the Antichrist. It seems unfair for someone to be born as a hybrid of a demon and a woman, because it seems like they didn't ask for that. They didn't make a choice. And, it's kind of like someone being born in a third world country where their dad died during or while their mom was pregnant. They didn't choose that. So it just kind of seems like, especially, I would imagine that the Antichrist is doomed for eternity, and just kind of seems a little unfair, unless you think it's similar to when Jesus came to be born of a woman, that Jesus existed before that. Do we believe that the Antichrist existed before he comes to Earth?
There's so much speculation. I mean, I've heard that that the Antichrist will actually be part Nephilim or Nephilim, however you pronounce it.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually the Nephilim themselves, I guess I kind of got the impression that they really aren't human, just like other animals really aren't human. So, I mean, could we say that I feel bad for a cat that was born like a cat? I mean,
gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know. Those are really good questions that I just don't know the answer to. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, Jared, I think you've kind of convinced me that I'm not a Nephilim, given what the implications of that would be about Dad. But I mean, I guess there's always a chance that, something happened when Dad was at work.
Yikes. But you don't have black eyes, though.
All right. Well, we got a fun time with you. It's actually the first time we've kind of parted ways with our traditional way of doing things here on Pastor with No Answers. We typically bring two guests on that usually, or actually I would say maybe 100% of the times, have disagreed mainly with each other's main point of view with the topic at hand. In this episode, we have Science Mike. A lot of you know him from the Liturgist podcast. He also does a podcast called Ask Science Mike. Both of those podcasts would be worth your time to check out. And we have actually already had this interview. And so I want to go ahead and tell you beforehand, those of you that think maybe a little more shallow about science and don't really concern yourself with all the intricacies and details of everything, this will be a challenge for you, but I think a very fun challenge. We kind of keep it light, and at the same time, it's some pretty complicated stuff. Not to you, Jared. It was kind of like ABCs to you, huh?
I'm a science geek,
yeah.
So I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, so this conversation to you was kind of like, for me, 1 + 1 is 2. 2 + 2 is 4.
It was intellectually stimulating for me. Just that nonsense is not intellectually stimulating for you. So it's that whole analogy breaks down.
Yeah. Here's the thing: is I am very interested in pretty much all of science, but there is a certain threshold of the once it gets super complicated and super detailed. There's a certain like I said, there's a certain threshold where I just kind of I kind of don't understand, and then I just kind of give up.
Yeah, no, and I get that. And that's kind of one of the points I was trying to make in this episode, is that I think when we're talking about really, really, really deep, like quantum physics or relativity theory, there's only maybe 0.001% of the people on the Earth that truly understand it.
Yeah.
So at some point, we have to admit ignorance.
Yeah.
So I see your point, and I think that's completely valid.
Yeah.
So
I do think it's really cool. I mean, he kind of gave us a snapshot of a story that you'll hear in a second, but it is kind of cool to have someone that's so scientific minded, and it's like, yeah, but I can't deny that I have to believe this truth that I've experienced. It's just kind of.
Yep.
Anyway, Science Mike, folks, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. We are here with Science Mike, and Mike, I don't know how to say your last name.
Nobody does, which is why I do the Science Mike thing. But McHarg is the way you do that.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited about this conversation, and so here's the thing, Mike. We just had a conversation with Matt Carter, who you're very familiar with and friends
Love
with.
Matt.
And then L.A., what's his last name, Jared?
Marzulli.
All right, so L.A. Marzulli, he is one of the front runners of the whole Nephilim researcher. Basically, the pyramids were built by Nephilim, and alien abductions and all that stuff is demonic activity. I mean, he actually has access to, elongated skulls that, and anyway, the conversation, which you could probably guess how it played out, was Matt's like, I'm not buying any of this. This is all really stupid. You guys sound really stupid. And Matt and I are obviously great friends. And I just said, Matt, all right, look, I totally get there are some people wired up like Jared and I that are, lean a little more towards, okay, not only do we believe in the supernatural virgin birth, Jesus died, rose, he's our savior, but we also lean a little more towards, okay, yeah, there's probably some spiritual warfare, demonic activity. Maybe the pyramids were built by, Nephilim and all that stuff, where Matt's more like, I just kind of see the, worldview through the lenses of science. And, okay, I know, Matt would say from experience, I believe Jesus is real, but everything else, he kind of leans away from all that. But in the conversation, and I would obviously say this in front of Matt, in the conversation, I told Matt, I was like, look, it doesn't even seem like you're even interested in hearing what LA would say. No, this is evidence. Let's kind of talk about it. And it, honestly, I think you would enjoy it. And when this episode comes out, this will be after that episode. But Matt actually said, he was just like, dude, you've got to get Jared and Science Mike together because they can't disagree more. But Science Mike is actually nice, and they'll actually have good constructive conversations. So
wait, who said that? Matt said that?
Yeah, Matt said that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Basically, Science Mike and Jared would have a great conversation. They would disagree on everything, but Science Mike is nice, and it would be way more constructive than Matt Carter talking or Godless or any of the other guys we had. So I guess for our listeners that have not heard you, Mike, like what's kind of been your journey, so to speak, with your Christian faith and science? And, I have no idea. I don't really know your background, and I just know that I really like the Liturgist podcast, and I like what you have to say.
Okay, well, I'll give you the super short version.
Yeah.
And anyone who wants the 2-hour plus version can listen to episodes 6 and 7 of the Liturgist podcast.
Awesome.
But the super short version is I grew up Southern Baptist and loved it.
Yeah.
Was baptized at 7 and stayed in the church. By the time I was 25, I was a Sunday school teacher, a deacon, a young husband, and a soon-to-be father. So pretty good scene.
Yeah.
A couple years later, my dad, who was the music minister of our church, had an affair and left my mom. And so I went to the Bible to figure out God's answers to my dad's marital problems so that I could inform Dad God's opinion about his behavior accurately.
Right.
I nerdily, obsessively read the Bible 4 times in 1 year, a process that led me to doubt and deconstruction and ultimately to atheism. I left my faith behind completely.
Yeah.
For 2 years, I was an atheist in secret. So I was an atheist online and with people I didn't know personally.
And just to appease me, what year are we at around right now?
Oh gosh, 2010, 2011.
Gotcha.
And then in 2012, I told my wife and my mom that I didn't believe anymore.
Dang.
They prayed for a miracle so that I wouldn't spend eternity in hell,
Right.
in their opinion.
Right.
And I was completely by coincidence invited in the same weekend to visit NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center in Los Angeles and go to a very small conference with a guy named Rob Bell.
Yeah.
While there, I confronted Rob about the absurdity of Christian belief and practice. He challenged me to reevaluate how I approached certainty by using the word God. A very long story short, after that, I heard Jesus talk to me during the Eucharist, which was confusing and overwhelming. And then I had a mystical experience on the beach where reality seemed to fall away and I was left in the presence of God. And then since that point in May 2012, I have been searching cosmology and neurology and science for a better understanding of what happened that night on the beach, since although it was powerful, it didn't erase the questions I had about God. And so that leads me to where I am now, a person who is both a scientific empiricist and skeptic, as well as a mystic and a Christian.
Wow. I like how you put all that. Good gosh. So when I hear that, I'm like, oh, it kind of sounds like Dave Bazan-ish, but then you had an experience and there's no way you could shake it, which I was just telling Jack, and obviously that's a very shallow way of putting all that, but
That's pretty accurate.
We've been able to talk to Dave Bazan a lot, but yeah, I told Jared, I was like, because we just got off the phone with Matt, and I was just like, Matt Carter to me is almost like he's almost like on the other side, like as Christians see themselves as the good guys and everybody else as the bad guys. I don't see it that way, but Matt's kind of like one of the bad guys that God gut, because Matt sees everything in more of an atheistic light. Now I'm putting, I mean, these are my words, except for I had an experience and so I believe in the Bible, sort of thing. And so it sounds like, so I guess what I want to ask you is, when it comes to your background and where you're at right now. So if someone were to say, Mike, are you a Christian? Like, that's way more of a complicated question, it sounds like, for you. For me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm a Christian.
No, I would definitely say I'm a Christian as well.
Gotcha.
But I would be leaning into the incredibly broad historical definition of that term, acknowledging that every Christian is some other Christian's heretic.
Yeah.
And so while some Christians would not consider me to be one,
right,
the fact that I'm a member in good standing of an apostolic Christian denomination,
right,
and a person who's chosen to follow Christ for whatever confusing and conflicting reasons that may be, it qualifies me to use the term Christian without hesitation.
Gotcha. You guys did, you guys did a great job with the multiverse episode at the end. I don't know if y'all were purposely trying to pull this off, and Jared, if you haven't heard it, you need to listen to it. But it really did leave the Christian like me being like, holy shit, there's a very good chance that I'm seeing 0.0000001% of the reality of truth, and that doesn't mean that my belief in Jesus is wrong or God or anything, but definitely it was almost confirming for me, because I really do believe that when I get to heaven, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, like I really didn't know anything. Like I was on earth and I saw things a certain way, saw things through a certain light, but oh my gosh, I just didn't see anything. And I don't know if y'all were trying to pull that off, but it definitely, I was like, yeah, it's kind of how I feel.
I hate to admit how little thought goes into the structure of most of our episodes. We start talking and we stop recording when we feel like we've talked about science, art, and faith.
Nice.
Now, some episodes, of course, are much higher produced. But the multiverse, literally with no rehearsal, no preparation, Michael and I sat down in the studio and just hit recorded. Just hit
Nice.
record.
Well, brilliant work. All right, so here's where Jared and I really want to pick your brain with, because I would say that I'm somewhere in the middle with this, but I probably lean more towards Jared than I do. I know I keep bringing up Matt, but that's the conversation fresh in our mind. So I think Jared definitely, but me also, we would lean a little more towards, it seems like science, modern day science, has almost like a anti-Christian agenda. So, just hearing a little bit from you, I would assume.
I would just say more of a materialistic presupposition.
Okay.
I would agree with the second one and not the former.
Okay. So my question to you is, if there is a presupposition of materialism, where does a scientist acknowledge, okay, we're big into science, but if there is such thing as a supernatural, science can't really research that, and it seems like the presupposition is, okay, well, there can't be a supernatural. And I guess my deal, and I went through all the seminary stuff, which is very much so just black and white, and to me a little bit too narrow-minded, but I do think what I learned from that is just how science approaches things. It's like, okay, the supernatural can't necessarily be true, but then in my perspective, it's like, well, how do you know that if science can't really touch that? So how do you deal with that tension?
I am aware of the limitations of what science is and its uses. And most of all, I'm aware that science is not meant to be and should not be a philosophy.
Yeah.
Science is a means for uncovering facts about physical reality. It's based on something called procedural or methodological physicalism. And in methodological physicalism, you're basically saying, I'm going to establish a set of rules for learning about reality. And for science to work, you start with something called the null hypothesis, which basically means without evidence, I don't believe anything. That's based on something called empiricism. Scientist is an empiricist approach to learning about reality. And in empiricism, all you're doing is placing confidence in a belief that is proportional to the evidence you have for that belief. And so that means I can be very confident, for example, that 2 and 2 make 4, because I can grab 2 physical objects and 2 more physical objects and verify that when I bring the 2 and 2 together, I now have 4 objects. I can be very confident that gravity exists, or what the acceleration of gravity is, because I can measure the effects of gravity on reality, even though I can't see gravity, and even though the mechanism of gravity is unknown. Despite the great mystery of gravitational attraction, its effects can be observed consistently in material reality. Now, when we talk about the supernatural, science does not speak to the supernatural in the same way that science doesn't make moral claims, in the same way that science can't tell you what to do with scientific findings. Science also can't make judgments of aesthetics or beauty. All it does is uncover facts about the physical world, which gives a lot of religious people hope, because they say, aha, well, God is supernatural. And that's great. But there's a couple of points we want to think about if we're going to make such a claim and be well-rounded. Number one is that if a supernatural entity were to interact with physical reality in some way, it would leave evidence. Let me use an example from the Bible. When Elijah called down a fire from God onto that wet altar, a scientist present would be able to measure the heat from that fire and examine the ashes left afterwards. If God were to part the Red Sea, a scientist present would be able to observe the fact that despite every understanding of fluid dynamics and gravity, suddenly an ocean parted. It would be recordable and measurable. And scientists who are skeptical about the supernatural would simply point to the fact that we've never had a good, scientifically documented supernatural event in human history. We've never been able to gather that requisite evidence to support a supernatural claim. And if you accept claims without evidence, according to scientists and according to skeptics, you can accept any claim. So if you would say, for example, that the Red Sea parted without evidence, or that God exists without sufficient evidence, then why couldn't you say, well, what's a great example? One of the favorites of atheists is that there's a giant teapot orbiting around Saturn.
Well, couldn't you say the same thing about abiogenesis?
Abiogenesis effects remain. Life is here. We have good evidence that the universe is about 13.77 billion years old. We have good evidence that life on Earth has been around for billions of years, but not as long as the Earth itself. And so we don't know what caused abiogenesis. We have several theories, but none have been validated. They're just hypotheses at this point that something happened. And one of the rules of science is you must disclose not only what your model predicts, but its gaps. The standard model of physics knows nothing of gravity, and we admit that. Einstein's general and special relativity know nothing of quantum dynamics, and we admit that. In the same way that we say in abiogenesis, we don't know if that was an assembling of proteins and amino acids in a pool on Earth, or perhaps if Earth hitched a ride on meteorite from some other system or some other planet where life existed already. It remains a mystery in science. And saying, I don't know, is a core part of an operative scientific approach to reality.
Okay, so I get all that. No. I mean, that's a very well-articulated position.
Real quick, Jared. I already sound stupid enough on my own daggum podcast. Now I have to have Science Mike come on here, and I sound even way more stupider. So go ahead, Jared.
I just made all that up. That's all fake.
So what do you do? And I know this is low-hanging fruit for a lot of paradigm thinking scientists. What do you do with intelligent design? Because it seems to me these guys have come up with a way to detect empirically, scientifically evidence for design. And it seems like the one sticking point for people who reject that is that it doesn't preclude the supernatural.
I mean, intelligent design takes a set of rhetorical arguments. I don't know that it's not like they've gathered evidence. Intelligent design will say things like the universe was made old.
No. I'm talking about
non-consistent positions on carbon.
No. I'm talking about no. That's the old school creationism. I'm talking about the William Dembski new style of thinking where.
Oh, thank goodness! I thought we were talking Ken Hammond. I was about to hang up.
No. No, I'm just saying that they're actually modeling after things like encryption, right, or forensic sciences, where you're looking for the evidence of design. And so I don't remember all the different ways they're doing this, but they're really trying to tackle it from a very scientific, empirical standpoint. And it seems like why they're being shut out of the conversation is because they're allowing for an intelligent designer that kind of transcends nature. So is that philosophically?
I've talked to a lot of physicists who are open to, for example, deistic ideas of creation. I don't think that those people are being shut out. I'd also like to emphasize for any listeners, I am in fact both a Christian and a believer. So
right.
although I can speak authoritatively about not only science but the claims of atheism, I am not actually an atheist anymore. There's probably there's certainly a bias against being-based models in science today, and that a lot of that probably comes from the same conflation I just made. As soon as you say intelligent design, people go 6-day creation.
Right.
People go mythic. There are certainly more thoughtful philosophers and philosophers of science, and even some notable theorists who make evidence-based or reasonable model. It's the same thing. Have you heard of Jeremy England? Jeremy England has an abiogenesis theory that effectively is mathematically modeled that says that if you take the right kind of molecules and you put them in a system that's fed by an energy source like the sun, and they have a heat bath in the form of liquid, that lifelike molecules are not just possible, but inevitable mathematically.
That was a question I had too. So when does this leave the realm of speculation and become hardcore science? Because just because you have a
Excellent.
mathematical model that works, is that really science? Are you really replicating experiments and you're viewing, the results of these experiments? That's a question that I had.
That question is perfect. It's right where I was going because it affects not only Jeremy England, whose work is viewed favorably by many scientists, but also by intelligent design advocates.
Okay.
For science to advance from a hypothesis into a theory with a capital T, you have to have a model that not only describes reality as we see and observe it today, but makes testable predictions about what we have not observed yet. So, one of the reasons Einstein is such a stud is general relativity predicted some really counterintuitive, measurable effects in reality. One is that a galaxy sitting just right between the Earth and a more distant star would bend the light coming from that star using its gravity. It would, in effect, become a giant lens. And although that prediction was made, very, very early in the 20th century, it was 25 or 30 years before that was first observed. But when we saw it, it was what? Exactly as Einstein's
Right.
model predicted.
Right.
So the same
But
is
certainly,
true for
didn't Einstein
any.
have empirical evidence to drive that theory, or was it all thought based?
It started. So that's the great thing about science. It starts with imagination, with a wonder, with guessing how the world could work. And then theorists take that imagination based model and they work out the mathematics behind it. And once you have a mathematical model, you can make physics predictions. Now, so that worked really well for Einstein, but let's talk
Right.
about a very popular theory today for a unified theory of quantum mechanics and gravity, which is string theory.
Right.
And all the variations of string theory, supersymmetry theory, in-brane theory, all these things have made predictions that when we fired up particle accelerators to sufficient energies, what has happened? They have not been validated. And so those researchers have to go back to their model, see if something is wrong and needs to be modified, or whether the model should perhaps be thrown out completely. And that's the measuring stick in science. It's not just your ability to create an elegant model, but for that model to make testable predictions that validate its accuracy. And so Jeremy England has created a fascinating bit of mathematical theory, as it sounds like some of the intelligent design proponents you're talking about have as well. But they both have something in common. Their theories have yet to be met with experimental or observational verification, and that's an essential component of moving from theory with a lowercase t to theory with a capital T in the sciences.
Okay, so another question that kind of goes with that. You have the Big Bang model, which is pretty much the accepted model, yet about 90% of what's out there in the universe is a mystery. So it seems to me there's a lot of arrogance to exalt this theory as really the theory right now, but so much without this out there is unaccounted for. So what do you make of that? I'm talking about dark matter and dark energy.
Yes, absolutely. So in it's okay in science to offer forth incomplete explanations with the best data you have, right?
Okay.
For example, Isaac Newton's Newtonian or classical physics was ruled the day for hundreds of years. But then along comes Einstein on the macro scale, and along comes Feynman and Heisenberg and all the quantum guys on the micro scale. And what happens? We realize Newtonian physics is wrong. But that's not enough to say that it's wrong. We realized Newtonian physics had limitations in its accuracy, that when you went to very small scales or very high velocities, high speeds, or very intense gravitational pulls, the behavior of either particles or space-time itself changed enough that Newtonian ideas didn't work. So Newtonian physics will perfectly describe the orbit of every planet in our solar system save one, and that's Mercury. Mercury is so close to the sun that its orbit is relativistic, a mystery no one understood before Einstein. But when Einstein comes along, it's not that Newtonian physics went away. It's that we understood their scale and place in the universe. Now, the Big Bang cosmology is a capital T theory for a reason. We have a phenomenal amount of data that supports it. But remember what I said before, part of science is disclosing what you do not know. So when we use observation based on the limited speed of light to look further and further into the past, we reach a limiting point. And that's about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, we believe, when the universe cooled enough to become transparent or translucent to visible light. It's called the cosmic microwave background radiation. Now, here's what's interesting about that radiation. It was predicted by a mathematical model before it was ever observed. So that's already, among many other things, reinforcing the power of that model, the predictive accuracy of Big Bang cosmology. But there's two great mysteries, if you'll let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
There's two great mysteries in the Big Bang. Number one, the universe looks a little bit wrong. And we assume that happened because of something called cosmic inflation, where space-time itself, right after the Big Bang, accelerated faster than the speed of light from the singularity. That has not been experimentally verified. That leads to things like dark matter and dark energy. That leads to an incomplete understanding of cosmology. And every astrophysicist and every cosmologist will look at you straight in the eye and admit that we don't understand it, and we don't have the means right now to test any of the competing theories that describe it. But there's an even bigger puzzle with the Big Bang, and that's that for it to work, the universe had to begin in something called a singularity, where infinite space and time were compressed nearly infinitely, and where when you do this mathematically, all our equations break down. It's the same thing that happens inside a black hole. The laws of physics stop making sense. We have no idea what singularity is or how we could ever test it. So we know today that Big Bang cosmology is incomplete, but we have 6 sigma confidence that at least in the post-inflationary period, it accurately describes how the universe unfolded based on the close match between theoretical predictions and what we observe when we point telescopes into the night sky. And I almost wish I would have known some of these questions ahead of time because I could have prepared answers. I'm totally vamping.
Well, I mean, one thing too, I'm more of a Bible first, science second kind of guy. I know we diverge strongly there. And I was watching. There's a professor.
I love the Bible. I gave it 4 stars on Amazon. It's a good book.
No. That's not what I meant. I meant I think the Bible trumps science in scientific matters.
Right, and that's an unscientific idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there are physicists who are acting on that approach, and they're doing real science. And they're pointing out there are a lot of things about the Big Bang model that, just like you said, can't be explained. So to me, it seems a bit arrogant to completely dismiss those guys who are doing real physics work because it doesn't fit the paradigm. So
this is a huge point. You're not supposed to bring those kind of presuppositions to science. You should never try to bend observations to a non-empirical model. Because here's the thing. How do you differentiate the accuracy of the claims of creation from the Bible, from other ancient creation stories, from the Quran? There's lots of people that have sincerely held religious beliefs about different creation epics, but on what grounds does the Bible trump science in describing how the universe was formed?
Right.
You see what I mean? So that's why they're dismissed, because they're taking non-scientific ideas into the scientific community. It's okay to be a person of faith and to practice science. There are many, many scientists who have a sincerely held Christian faith or Muslim faith or Buddhist faith, but when they show up in the laboratory, they follow the data, and they would never scientifically allow a holy book to trump to triumph over or trump observation because
That's where I
that's not
disagree.
science.
Yeah, but see, are you familiar with Thomas Kuhn?
0% familiar with Thomas Kuhn.
Okay, so he's a philosopher of science who had some popular ideas in I think the 50s and 60s. He was actually a trained physicist, but he became a professor at Princeton, and he had the idea of paradigms and
We're not
paradigm
having a
shifts.
debate, are we? Is this a debate?
No. It's a
Okay, because I have a
valid.
long-standing no debate policy.
No. It's not a debate. But I think it kind of fits in nicely because he's saying that in normal science that takes place day to day, you have scientists who are trained and work within paradigms. So the process of doing science necessarily involves bias, and you can't
Absolutely.
escape that.
No,
Okay.
I'm not avoiding that at all. What I'm saying is, as best as possible, science is designed to counteract our own biases, and it is not perfect in doing so. But the weight of carrying something like a presupposition that Genesis accurately describes the way reality unfolded is just a tremendous bias that is not based on observation. It's based on faith, which I get it. I believe in Jesus. I believe in a resurrection, and those are matters of faith. But I wouldn't make scientific claims based on those beliefs.
And see, this is where I have a hard time arguing because I'm not a trained astrophysicist, so I'm relying on the
I'm a
claims of
college
other.
dropout.
Yeah, so I can't argue that point. So I'm relying epistemologically on these other guys who say they are following real science, but their ideas are stemming from the way creation was portrayed in the Bible, and yet they're saying that their mathematical models, their scientific models are working out. They can make predictions and things like that. And again, I'm in
You
no
just have to send me a
epistemological
paper and
position.
have to review it. I mean, I try
Right,
to be
exactly.
conversant not only in the language but in the mathematics as well.
I'm with you. So it's hard for me. This is another topic I wanted to bring up. We live
That's
in
what I
an
mean. Like if I would have known the questions ahead of time, I could have given you a way
Yeah,
better
it's not a
answer.
debate. I know. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just saying that I'm coming from a position of epistemological ignorance. I am not a physicist. And so when I hear different scientists making different claims and they're both claiming science, I'm in no position to judge one way or the other. You know what I'm saying?
I
So,
do. Yeah.
okay,
Well, and I'm a epistemological nihilist. If I go to
interesting.
epistemology, I don't think any beliefs are justifiable at all.
Lovely.
So I kind of shortcut to pragmatism and then take a hop skip to
You should
empiricism because
you need
that's
to
all I
check
can
out
pull off.
you need to check out Paul Firebend. He was
Okay.
also an epistemological anarchist, he called himself.
Oh,
So
right on.
should
Sounds
get
right up
along
my
with his
alley.
ideas. Absolutely, yeah.
But so that where I go there, number one, you're a smart enough guy to have this conversation. So you would be surprised how well you could grok with a lot of these papers and publications. And number two, that's the value of consensus in the sciences. So anyone putting forth a intelligent design perspective on either a biogenesis or on cosmology is certainly operating from a minority position in the sciences today. Now,
Sure.
again, I can see, as I say this, that has problems. Guess what? Sometimes every couple hundred years, science gets completely turned on its ear. And at first, institutional science is extraordinarily resistant to the new claim that undermines the dogma. Because as you said, scientists are humans and they have bias. But in this case, I think that's actually a good bias. When we have well informed systems that work well enough to give us cell phones, to give us cancer medications, and to put nuclear robots on Mars, the value of that consensus in describing reality has been demonstrated, and there should be a reluctance to accept ideas that undermine that system unless they are accompanied with an overwhelming amount of evidence and data and information. By the way, is this yet your most boring podcast episode ever?
I'm really enjoying it. So
People are
I
tuning
like
out
it.
in droves. I don't think I've ever sounded this technical on the air. This is crazy.
Hey, Mike, you just basically said that all of our listeners are really dumb. Thanks a lot, man.
I wouldn't even run this. No, that's not what I mean. I just mean I wouldn't even run this on the liturgist. Like we cut these rants out when I go like this
No,
on the
this is
show.
great stuff. Hey, let the dumb guy talk a little bit. So, you know, originally you said that you would not agree with the statement as far as science being kind of having an anti supernatural or religious stance and all that sort of thing. Why don't you think in public schools, for example, why shouldn't there be another option? So I don't have any problem with them teaching evolution. I know a lot of Christians do. It's just like, oh, that's of the devil and all that stuff. But why isn't creationism just as pliable of an option?
So, in reference to Joey's question to Mike, Joey was arguing why not offer other perspectives, and I'm just saying, how about just talk about some of the problems with evolution? I didn't get that in my 2 years of high school biology. It was just taught as if it was fact, and we didn't see any of the problems that are out there with evolution.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that they talk like there are no problems, and I'll be honest, I've read a lot of the Christian, more propaganda kind of stuff that's just like evolution is pollution sort of thing. So I'm pretty ignorant with this sort of stuff. So I am curious: are there gaping holes in evolution, according to you, Mike?
No, I wouldn't. There's gaps in evolutionary theory.
Yeah.
But it's a capital T theory for a reason. Whenever science puts a capital T on the word theory, that means there's such an overwhelming body of evidence and accurate predictions from that model that it's safe to make assumptions based on that work for future scientific efforts. So I totally believe our science classes should include Big Bang cosmology. They should include evolutionary-based developments for life on Earth. But we also do have a problem in the way that high school and middle school and elementary school teachers are trained in the sciences. We're not doing a good job describing the way those conclusions are derived from an observation of evidence or the limitations of our understanding in science, which would help. Now, I don't necessarily think we should include intelligent design or other competing theories that have very small minority positions in the sciences.
Yeah.
If you open the door for that, you're going to spend all year talking about competing models with very little popular support. Intelligent design is not the only one.
But you would want to discuss the gaps, though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about the Big Bang, we should talk about cosmic inflation and its limitations. We should talk about the mystery of singularity. We should talk about the incomplete nature of the standard model of physics and how much difficulty we've had in particle physics finding competing models that describe things, because that's the only way. Science is fascinating. Talking about telling a room full of students that, guess what? You could be the person that finds a unified theory of space, time, and gravity. That could be you.
Yeah.
Because this work hasn't been done yet. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we could talk about that. Even though the theory of evolution is so widely accepted, and even though it's been very, very successful in predicting what we'll find in the fossil record for a couple hundred years.
What about transitional
work is
fossils?
not complete. The fossil record is full of transitional fossils.
What about the notion of punctuated equilibrium? Wasn't that a way to sort of like in an ad hoc way try to rationalize the fact that there were big gaps in the fossil record?
Yeah, Mike, the punctuated equilibriumism.
So the whole thing is there is no point where yesterday I was one species and the next I'm not. Evolution happens via small changes over time. Now, we have certainly had explosions in the fossil record based on, we think, ecological catastrophe or new niches emerging, where you've had a rapid development of new species. But still, there wasn't like yesterday you were a crocodile and today you're a bird. It's a much more gradual process. And frankly, fossilization is a relatively rare process. Soft tissues tend to not fossilize all that well, and bones only tend to fossilize under really ideal conditions, which, by the way, sometimes are more frequent. So when you have tar pits all over a region, for example, you have a much higher chance of something getting fossilized because it's more likely to be exposed to the requisite heat and pressure. So you have an intersection of the Earth's geological history and activity, as well as the change in climate over time, which is affecting the likelihood of any given individual organism on this planet being fossilized. So you have periods where fossilization is more common and less common, and that's happening in concert with the development of life. So we lack very early fossils because early life didn't have exoskeletons, early life didn't have bones, early life was very, very, very difficult to fossilize, which is one of the reasons abiogenesis is so tough for us to talk about.
But I guess, too, as a Christian, you don't have to deal with that.
But there's a clear progression from less complex fossils in the beginning to more complex fossils later. You don't see human fossils as old as, for example, um, deep sea, simple, pre arthropodic creatures. They don't coincide in the fossil record. You have much later emergence of more complex life. And
See, I have an
without,
explanation for that. I mean, and you're going to laugh out loud, and that's fine. But I mean, I believe that there is a global Noah flood, and the sediment buried the water dwelling creatures first, and that's why they're deeper in the actual fossil record.
so I respect that you believe that.
Okay,
I can understand you believe that. I think that falls far outside of what
the
any
paradigm.
scientist would accept as a reasonable understanding of the Earth's geology and the evidence left behind. And I would have you read the book The Rocks Don't Lie?
I have not read that.
Basically, one of the leading geologist basically takes apart every argument that creationists have that there was a global flood.
See, based on my
I would say
understanding,
effectively.
yeah. So based on my understanding too of this, radiometric dating, it seems that it's built on a lot of presuppositions. And
Well, I
so,
mean, all human knowledge is built on presuppositions.
okay, fine. Then that's all I needed to hear
I
from
mean,
that.
if we're not going to, like, our words are presuppositions. Everything we're doing involves presuppositions. The question is, can you follow a chain of evidence that validates those presuppositions? That's empiricism, right? That's why I'm an
Right, right.
empiricist. And what I would
But it
say
seems
is,
circular though. If you're dating something because of the radiometric dating, but that's built on presuppositions that are already embedded in a paradigm.
but I could say the same thing if
Sure,
you're
sure, for sure,
accepting words from the Bible that's
for
based on a
sure,
presupposition of the Bible. You see
for
what I
sure.
mean? Like
Absolutely. No,
that's what I
I'm
mean. Like the following that road, that's spheric skepticism, and the only outcome is nihilism. So the reason I go with empiricism is the way it demonstrates its effectiveness in reality over and over and over and over again. Using empiricism allows us to manipulate and understand reality more effectively than anything else.
And so I guess for that point, I would just raise the question, can't quote unquote objectively minded scientists interpret the same data in different ways?
It happens all the time.
Okay.
Scientists are constantly taking different takes on data, which is why peer review and consensus are so vital to the sciences. And I will admit we have problems in peer review. For example, in the social sciences right now, especially in psychology, we have a huge problem with results that were published and never were peer reviewed, but were never duplicated. And so as we're looking deeper, we're finding a lot of work that was accepted that you can't actually replicate. So it's not a perfect process, but over time, again, pragmatically, peer review and consensus have shown their ability to describe reality well. So
Okay.
even though I agree that there's to some degree you can say, well, that's based on a system, that's based on a presupposition. Sure, totally. But the presuppositions of science work. That's how we get on the
Wait, you
moon.
mean, presuppositions in general, but I'm talking about like certain presuppositions for certain theories. That's probably where you and I are talking about different things. Now, I agree that there's an empirical model or empirical way of doing science in general, but I'm saying pursuing various theories, those theories have inherently built in presuppositions oftentimes. No?
Yeah, they should, and they should disclose typically the way science works, you're going to disclose what's based on tested assumptions versus what you're taking a working theory for the sake of getting work done.
Okay.
Right? So if you're working on some successor to string theory and you're assuming that quantum nature is described by one-dimensional vibrating strings, mathematically that's viable theoretical work, but you have to admit that's not an empirically verified claim yet.
Right.
So even though you may even be able to do useful work with it, it's not yet accepted or validated science.
Would you say that there could perhaps in the very near future be an end to science in certain fields like quantum field theory or cosmology because the energy required to actually delve that deeply into nature we just can't achieve?
Yeah, it's a real problem.
Okay, okay.
They're doing these conferences right now about the future of science.
Right.
So a lot of string theorists want to go, math is enough. And a
Wow.
lot of other scientists and people like me are going, are you crazy?
Right.
If you
I'm the
do
same
that,
way.
it's a new religion.
Yes.
So, but absolutely, gravity waves, hopefully we're going to find them because that's really going to help us shore up some of the issues with cosmic inflation. That would be a signal we could sample and measure that originated in the very first nanoseconds of the creation of the cosmos. We've had a couple of false starts so far looking for gravity waves, but there's hope we could get there. But
Right.
probing smaller and smaller quantum phenomenon, you're right. It's tough to find the political will to build particle accelerators large enough. And with some theories of unified quantum dynamics, you would need a particle accelerator far, far beyond not only humanity's engineering capacity, but even our theoretical capacity.
Right.
But humans are clever. We've been backed up in the corner before, and all it takes is a once in a generation Einstein to come along and realize there's some shortcut or some hole that everyone else missed that suddenly make things clear. So I would be hesitant or very reluctant to count science out, but I would also say absolutely we are right now brushing up against the edge
Right.
of what we can engineer and test versus what we can predict theoretically.
Gotcha. Joey, going
But I
back
think
to
that validates science. The fact that science goes ahead and says, look, we're having problems here.
yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Science is built around admitting your ignorance.
Right. Joey, going back to the idea of consensus and paradigms, did you want to ask Mike about the movie Expelled?
Yeah, I was gonna. Have you seen Expelled?
I have not.
Okay, all right.
I haven't even heard of it.
Yeah, it's a Ben. I think Ben Stein has.
It's a documentary.
Yeah, and it basically.
I'm mostly a reader. If
Yeah.
you might catch that.
Gotcha. And I've read stuff pro the movie and anti the movie. Basically, obviously, anti is saying that it's got a huge agenda to discredit science, but basically, Expelled gives a depiction of how a lot of scientists that have spoken more towards a scientific / biblical framework and approach, to study and all that stuff are threatened to lose tenure, are ridiculed. And
Joey, I wouldn't even say biblical. I would say straight up intelligent design as a science.
yeah,
Or anything that really shows major errors or flaws in commonly accepted Darwinian theory.
yeah, yeah,
And so I guess the whole point of this is I think consensus is good, but I think it could also be a curse as well. And that's the whole idea of paradigms. If you're fully ensconced in a paradigm, then sometimes there could be blinders that you've bought in so much into an idea that you can't look past the blinders. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
cool. All right. Well,
It does make. I mean,
Okay.
we all carry biases.
Sure.
We're
Most
all
definitely.
resistant. Scientists aren't immune to that.
Okay.
Again, the way to knock down those institutional biases or large theory biases is to bring forth an amazingly well-composed model that is supported by evidence and to publish it. That's how change happens in science. I can't speak to the specific issues that documentary talks to. I'm completely unfamiliar with them.
Sure.
But I would say in general, that's how you drive change in the sciences. You show your data is better than their data, and you publish that via a framework that's axiomatically consistent, that discloses its limitations, and has results that are reproducible by other scientists in other labs.
But you would admit that's an uphill battle. I mean, if you're challenging the status quo in the sense of a paradigm that's well established, I mean, it's much easier to do research that's going to be, positively contributing to the paradigm as opposed to
Sure,
publishing
totally.
things it's not.
We have a huge problem, not just with intelligent design. There's I'll flip the head on you right now. Try to I'm in the state of Florida. Try to be a scientist working on climate change and get government funding because our governor has said that no one in the state government can use the term climate change. So that's created an institutional bias that's limiting the ability of good science to occur even within a well-accepted model or framework. Institutional bias is a thing.
Okay.
You know,
I agree.
So, but if I was an intelligent design person and I had a great theory, I would imagine I could talk to some deep-pocketed evangelicals and say, "Look, guys, I need help funding this research. We can blow the science world wide open." Like, so
Yeah, but
and that might be
no. I
the
mean,
entrepreneur in me.
the moment you attach evangelical to science is the moment you've sabotaged that scientific endeavor. So I'm
I
not sure
would
if that's
agree, unless, or not, whatever. The Templeton Foundation, who's much more respected and funds good science work. What I'm saying is, if I had a model that was that convincing and that good, I'd find a funding partner. And when my paper was published, and I talked to the news media, and I'd probably work with a couple independent researchers to do nothing but replicate my work from reputable institutions and provide the funding to do that, I'd have enough to raise enough of a question to cause serious consideration with my predictions.
right.
So that's how change works in the sciences.
It would require
And there was,
that
I
extra
don't know if you know
push
this, there
for
was a
sure.
huge battle between Einstein, who at this point was very dominant in his career, and the quantum theorist. Einstein spent enormous energy trying to shut these guys
Yeah,
out.
God does not play dice with the universe.
Yeah, but it was more than that. I mean, he was relatively, he would release these papers with really respected researchers that undermined all the assumptions these guys had
Right.
and keep them ever pushed towards the edge of the scientific community. It was more difficult for them to get funding, but guess what? Their data worked. Their predictions were testable, and data won the day. And that's the reason today we not only know about Albert Einstein, but we also know about Richard Feynman. We also know about Werner Heisenberg. It's because their models were so good that the more tests were done, the more you could not resist. You could not push back against the power of those predictions, many of which were phenomenally counterintuitive and undermined not only classical Newtonian physics, but relativity itself.
I got to say, you're a really cool guy to talk with because you're not defensive and you're very humble in your approach to science. No, you really are, and I
I
respect
just
the
have
heck
fun.
out of that.
As long I hate debates, but if we're
Right,
like
right.
talking to learn from each other, I'll do that
Sure.
all day.
Absolutely.
All right,
I
so
I've
love it.
talked to
Mike,
so many people that
oh,
just automatically want to throw in your face, say this is fact. There's no room, there's no gaps anywhere, and at least you're admitting that there are things we don't know. And I appreciate that humble approach.
That's dogma. If you think there's no
Hey,
gaps
I'm
in
with you,
what
man.
you know, it's dog. And here's the thing for me, I've been wrong so many times in my life. I am an expert at being wrong.
Right.
And I know today I'm wrong about a ton of things. I just don't know which things they are. And I'll never know what I'm wrong about unless I'm open to people showing me new insights, new information, and I enjoy the process of learning. And basically, learning is figuring out that you're wrong.
Yep.
And people describe that as humility. And I guess what it really is, I'm just hungry for knowledge, and even more than knowledge, for truth.
Yeah.
awesome.
Well said. Well said.
Mike, we're going to end with a popcorn series of questions.
Oh boy.
And Jared, you're off the hook. Mike, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer each of these questions. You can take less time if you want, but the 30 seconds is really, it should be seen as like a bailout, because if you're just like, I'll just say you got to stop now. So first question is, how do you read the Bible?
The Bible
Yep.
is a library of books written by people about God. And because of that, it is the greatest source of solidarity, inspiration, and guidance for anyone who wants to be a follower of Jesus or his Father God.
Nice. Do you believe that the vast majority of people that have existed in life are going to spend eternity in hell?
No,
What's going to happen to people that don't put their faith in Jesus?
I'm agnostic towards the afterlife. I have no idea what happens when we die.
But you don't think people are going to be tortured in any way, shape, or form?
I would have no evidence to believe that.
Do you give any credence to annihilationism or universalism?
I'm probably a universalist in that I believe whatever happens after death happens to everyone.
Nice, nice. Do you believe that there's any sort of legitimacy to alien abductions, UFO sightings that is actually directly connected to demonic activity?
I am skeptical of both human encounters with aliens and demonic activity. Alien activity because of something called the Fermi paradox, which your listeners can look up via Google. It's fascinating. And demonic activity, I think we're talking about something real, but they're not beings. I would probably believe in something more like a mimetic demon.
Interesting. All right, so how you talk and how you carry yourself and the things that you say, I think a lot of unbelievers, especially scientific-minded ones, would probably give you more of their attention. Why do you think there is a huge sect in the church, I would say maybe even the majority, that are way more dogmatic with their approach in the Bible? Like, do you think there's purpose behind that, or do you think it just sucks and God's kind of shaking his head in disbelief?
I don't think it sucks. I think most things people do are in reaction to history.
Yeah.
And modern American Christian fundamentalism is a reaction to a period of extreme theological liberalism in the mid to late 1800s. So I understand that the pendulums had to swing far towards literalism to compensate for liberalism. And today, I think it's just we've reached the end of that pendulum swing and are starting to move back. And I don't frown on anyone for searching for truth or trying to understand God through Scripture.
Gotcha. All right, last question on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being infallible and 1 being a lunatic that you don't want to hear anything he has to say. Where would you put Paul's epistles? Where would you rank him as far as when you read his epistles? How do you read?
Do you mean the ones that I think Paul wrote, or the ones that are pseudographs written by anonymous authors and attributed to Paul?
The ones that Paul wrote, and then I want to hear which ones you don't think he wrote.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I'm not a biblical scholar. I would be very skeptical that Paul wrote 2 Timothy, for example.
Right.
The value of Scripture to me is that it was written by people who followed God and assembled by the church of which I am a part. It is a fully human document about God. That said, I think Paul said things that were appropriate to his time, and in other cases stumbled upon brilliance which was timeless. So I'm going to give Paul a 6.5 because between me and Paul, I got to admit, like Facebook, it's complicated.
Gotcha. Christianity is more about experience than anything else, would you say? Well,
I don't know if you know, I'm not hesitant to tell the truth. So that wasn't a laugh like, oh, the PR fallout. That was I don't know.
Right. It seems like that's what if you want to throw the word testimony out, it seems like that's what your testimony would be is, look, this isn't how my mind is geared towards. All I know is I had an experience and I can't deny it. And so, okay. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense at least?
It does. I wouldn't ground my faith solely in experience.
Yeah.
There, I can't do that in 30 seconds. Sorry.
Nope. No problem. It's great having you here.
Yeah, Mike.
What's your podcast name? Is just Science Mike?
Ask Science Mike is my show, and of course you can see that at AskScienceMike.com. Or if you want to hear different topics through the lenses of science, art, and faith, you can check out the Liturgist podcast at theliturgist.com/podcast.
Thank you guys for listening to Pastor with No Answers. And I'm here with my friend Dickie the Duck. Did you enjoy that, Dickie?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was awesome. I love Science Mike.
So do you where are you at with all this stuff?
I take the Bible literally.
You take the Bible literally? Oh, okay. Okay, so did you think Science Mike was just kind of full of it or something?
Yeah, he's stupid.
Stupid? You just called Science Mike stupid? I think he's actually a very, very, very smart guy.
Well, to each his own.
To each his own. All right. Well, Dickie, get out of here, man.
Okay.
Well, guys, thanks for listening. Facebook.com/BC Pastor. Join us on there. We'll continue the conversation a little bit, and follow us on Twitter at PWNAPod. And hey, go to iTunes and type in The Liturgist. One of my favorite podcasts for sure. Science Mike is on there with Michael Gunger. And then also you have Science Mike has his own podcast. Google all that stuff and or get it. Just go to iTunes is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. All right. Have a good one. See you next week.